This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Sue Herrera.
Stocks soar. The S&P 500 closes at a record. The Dow regains 22,000, all because Hurricane Irma could have been a lot worse.
In the dark, more than half of Florida is without power tonight, and that could temporarily cool the state's hot economy.
Giving back. Sports stars and celebrities are traders for a day to raise money to honor those who lost their lives 16 years ago. Those stories and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Monday, September 11th.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Stocks took off at the opening bell today and never turned back. Investors were in a buying mood, sending the S&P 500 to its 31st closing record of the year. All three major indexes rallied more than 1%. So why the optimism? Well, in part because Hurricane Irma delivered a less forceful than expected hit on Florida, and concerns over North Korea eased as well, at least for now. Let's get right to the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average advanced 259 points to 22,057, biggest one-day gain in 6 months. The Nasdaq added 72, and the S&P 500 gained 26. Bob Bazzani now with more on the rally from the floor of the NYSE.
The markets returned to rally mode today, and a number of factors contributed to that rally. First, while the damage from Hurricane Irma was extensive, it wasn't as catastrophic as feared. Second, there will be money for rebuilding, and that may be the ultimate fallout from Harvey and Irma. It may shift the focus in Washington away from taxes and towards hurricane relief and more fiscal spending. Other factors also help, particularly in absence of weapons tests in North Korea over the weekend when the regime celebrated its 69th anniversary. New sanctions against North Korea, which are being voted on tonight in the United Nations, have also been watered down. That's contributing to a less tense environment between the U.S. and North Korea. Finally, bond yields have begun rising again after 2 weeks of going straight down, and that's moved bank stocks up about 2% today. The markets have been amazingly resilient. It barely dropped last week on the hurricane fears and the North Korean fears, but it's rallied hard today when both concerns appeared to ease. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Bob Pisani at the New York Stock Exchange.
Christina Hooper joins us now to talk more about today's rally and whether or not it will last. She is global strategist at Invesco. Good to see you, Christina, as always.
Same here.
A pretty impressive move by the S&P and by the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But what kind of staying power or depth do you think this rally really has?
Well, that's a great question. I do think it could last for several days. Keep in mind that there's certainly a lot of relief over Hurricane Irma not being as devastating as had been expected. But I also believe part of this rally is due to a rethinking on the part of markets in terms of the deal struck by the Trump administration with Democrats in Congress last week. It suggests that there is the opportunity for bipartisanship and the potential for agenda items like tax reform to get done. So I do believe it has some staying power, but I also expect that events later this month are likely to derail it.
So you think that the deal struck last week that included hurricane funding, a raising of the debt ceiling or a suspension of it for 3 months, and a continuing resolution suggests that there may be more opportunity for deals to get tax reform and other imperatives done? Explain that to me.
Well, now we have a lot of the concerns about Washington, D.C. dysfunction out of the way for September. That was a big concern heading into last week. So now Congress actually does have a limited window of time to tackle tax reform. It would have to be in a bipartisan way. But after the health care failings that we saw earlier this year, it may be the best approach for the Trump administration to accomplish some kind of tax legislation.
You also point out the fact that you are expecting the start of balance sheet normalization. In other words, the Fed to make some moves to shrink its balance sheet a little bit after all the money that they put in after the financial crisis. What kind of volatility might that bring to the market?
Well, we're in uncharted territory. Keep in mind that balance sheet increases have been really what caused the economy to recover out of the Great Recession. And so we have this bloated balance sheet that the Fed has had for years. And now we're going to start talking about normalizing it. And even though the Fed wants to be ever so deliberate and careful and thoughtful, it still could be jarring to markets.
All right, Christina, we'll leave it there. Thank you. Christina Hooper with Investco.
Thank you.
Well, now to Hurricane Irma, which packed a punch, especially over the Florida Keys. But for the rest of the state, the hit wasn't quite as bad as many had feared. The strong winds and torrential rains did, however, leave much of Florida in the dark. There are reports that 65% of the state is without power, making it hard for the nation's fourth largest economy to recover quickly. And as Jackie DeAngelis reports from Riviera Beach, the situation is improving slowly.
More than 6 million people in Florida lost power after Irma. Almost every part of the state impacted by the outages.
We lost power over there since Friday, before the hurricane was even nearby.
Crews of 50 to 60,000 people will be working to restore resources as quickly as possible, with some help from neighboring states. Officials pleading that people stay patient.
I'm having daily calls with the utilities to get the power back on. They're going to do everything we can. I've been talking to nursing homes all morning. I've been talking to assisted living. Everybody needs their power back on.
The major shipping channels in Florida also saw closures. Ports in Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, and West Palm Beach on hold until the Coast Guard makes sure it's safe for vessels to pass through.
Our port's a serious critical port in relation to providing relief supplies to the Caribbean islands. Those islands were hit 5 days ago, some of them devastated, and a lot of the relief supplies that go to them come out of our port.
Gasoline will also come through the ports, but only after the Coast Guard gives the nod and power is restored to the terminals. West Palm Beach, Miami, and Tampa seeing gas station closures of more than 50% each. So while the damage from Hurricane Irma might be less than expected, it's still going to be a while before this state and its economy are back up and running. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Jackie DeAngelis, Riviera Beach, Florida.
The full impact of the hurricanes on Florida's citrus industry is not yet known, but it is believed that growers dodged the worst of it. Citrus is a major part of Florida's economy, producing almost 60% of the oranges in the U.S.
And tourism, of course, is another huge part of the Sunshine State's economy. Florida attracted almost 113 million tourists last year, and tourism supports nearly 1.5 million jobs. Two of Florida's biggest attractions, the Universal and Disney theme parks in Orlando, are set to reopen tomorrow. Cruise industry shares were higher today on the belief that the disruptions to that business would be temporary, despite major damage to such prime destinations as the U.S. Virgin Islands and St. Martin. The Caribbean is the cruise industry's largest market.
With the focus now on recovery, some local officials are looking to small business owners, not just the big ones, to play a leading role. Contessa Brewer is in Miami tonight.
Irma uprooted massive trees and scattered smaller ones across roadways, toppling others onto cars. Its furious winds piled sand from Hollywood Beach onto the Broadwalk against boarded-up businesses. By daylight, some Floridians toured the damage, taking stock. Armand Messina, a Florida Keys resident and small business owner, was trying to get back.
My entire property was 5 feet underwater. 100% loss.
Today, he got an urgent request from his city manager in Marathon.
It seemed as how that were an electrical contractor and a shutter contractor to start working on the infrastructure to try to get them back up online.
But transportation is a big headache. Gasoline's in short supply, and contractors are begging the governor to help.
I got a friend in Miami that we're going to stop by. He's got some cans of fuel for me.
The power's out throughout much of South Florida. So when the lights are on, business is booming. 911 Food in Dania Beach never even closed during Irma.
We've been here almost 40 years. If we can open, we'll open.
In downtown Miami, 2 cranes collapsed during the storm, and construction debris flew from high-rise towers. Today, the glass litters the ground. Downed trees block streets in the Brickell Avenue neighborhood, known as Wall Street South. The city's financial capital saw feet of flooding from Irma's storm surge. Some of the biggest names in banking are assessing the damage in Miami today. Wells Fargo, Morgan Stanley, Deloitte, all out trying to figure out, among many others, when they can get back up and running.
I'm just checking, how is the building, so just to tell my co-workers we can come back tomorrow to work.
Jose Joven works for Convergia, a communications provider. One of his biggest clients is Uber in Latin America, and he is chomping at the bit to get back inside his building. Armand Messina is chomping at the bit to get back to life as he knows it.
I'm hoping by the time we get down there, the roads will be clear and we can hopefully get down there. I don't know what's going to happen when we get to Florida City.
For Nightly Business Report, Contessa Brewer, Miami.
Insurance stocks, you guessed it, rose today after a brutal week last week. The popular insurance ETF, ticker KIE, finished the day 2% higher. And one smaller Florida home insurer, which was set to lose a bundle, skyrocketed. But the sector isn't out of the woods just yet. Morgan Brennan explains.
Hurricane Irma will pressure the insurance industry, but the impact will not be as great as feared.
You went from an expectation that the insurance industry could have saw about $125 billion of losses just from this event to now today we're looking at around $40 billion of losses. So the fact that the storm veered towards the west coast of Florida really cut the level of losses, by about a third.
Insurance and reinsurance stocks like Travelers, Chubb, and XL Group rallied today as the worst-case scenario did not play out with Hurricane Irma, a scenario that had originally called for a direct hit on Miami. Risk modeling firm AIR Worldwide now estimates insured losses could be $20 to $40 billion. That includes damages from wind and storm surge, but excludes Irma's impact on the broader economy and the losses sure to come for the federal government's flood insurance program. It's a staggering sum, 2 times the estimate for Hurricane Harvey, according to Wells Fargo. But with the industry sitting on a mountain of capital, it's still small enough that insurers like Assurant can manage it.
We expect to have a loss of at least of our retention, which is $127 million. But we don't think we'll come near the top of our reinsurance and exposure of $1.1 billion. So it's still really early to have definitive answers, but we've modeled it. We've looked at the wind speeds. We've looked at flooding and storm surge, and we do feel it's in the bounds of what we would have expected now.
Near-term earnings will feel the effects, but analysts expect only a handful of yet-to-be-identified reinsurers to take the biggest losses. Still, while it won't be as bad as feared, at least not for the broader sector, both Irma and Harvey will make history, joining Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Andrew, and even Hurricane Katrina as 2 of the costliest hurricanes on record. The hope now that the worst is finally over, especially since a third threat, Hurricane Jose, remains on the horizon. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Morgan Brennan.
And it is not just the cost of Hurricane Irma that's being tallied, but also Hurricane Harvey. And the 1-2 punch of these massive storms could ding the broader U.S. economy for billions of dollars. Steve Leisman has that part of the story.
Initial estimates of the potential cost of these 2 monstrous storms being pegged at $150 to $200 billion. Moody's Analytics put the cost of Harvey at $86 to $108 billion, and the very preliminary costs of Hurricane Irma were pegged at $64 to $92 billion, but there could be more damage to count. It was unclear, for example, if Moody's had figured in the late-day flooding in cities like Jacksonville, Florida, or Charleston, South Carolina. In those totals are some $20 to $30 billion of lost economic output from idle hotels, people who can't get to work, and power outages that shut down commerce. Moody's shaved its third-quarter GDP forecast for the entire nation by 0.5 point to 2.5%, but expects a reconstruction rebound in the fourth quarter. And that depends on the timing of insurance payments and government assistance, and even the ability to find enough construction workers to rebuild the state.
And that's a lot of homes that have to be rebuilt. It's a lot of cars that have to be replaced. On the home front, so to speak, that's more lagged, though. I can go out tomorrow as soon as the storm passes and practically get an insurance payment and buy a car. That process happens very quickly. On homes, especially if you don't have insurance and you've got to wait for the government insurance, that can take months before you start to rebuild.
Florida ranks 4th among states in economic output, generating nearly $1 trillion of GDP annually. But it's 27th in per capita income, with many wealthy retirees, but also seniors on modest pensions, along with many poor and working class families. The top industries in Florida: trade and transportation, followed by professional and business services, education and health, along with leisure and hospitalities, which are all those theme parks and hotels. These storms can leave enduring impacts on lives, but don't generally have lasting national impacts on the economy. In the case of Harvey, a lot depends on how quickly those refineries can get up and running. For Irma, it's a matter of getting the lights back on, the streets cleared, and airports, and especially the theme parks, up and running, up and down and across the nation's fourth largest state. For 90 Business Report, I'm Steve Leisman.
Still ahead, Apple's new iPhone could come with an eye-popping price tag. Is the smartphone entering a new era? Two senators asked Equifax to answer detailed questions about the breach we told you about last week. The lawmakers also want to know when 3 executives who sold stock in the company in August were first notified of the cyber attack. Up to 143 million Americans had their personal information compromised.
Mixed signals on solar power use in the U.S. According to an industry report, installations rose 8% in the second quarter, despite a sharp pullback in residential rooftop systems. But it's that decline in residential use that experts say is putting the industry on track for its first annual decline.
China is considering a move that would ban the production and sale of vehicles powered by fossil fuels. Chinese regulators have not decided when the ban would take effect or whether it will, but there are reports that car makers are being called upon to adjust their strategies to the changing situation. China is the world's largest auto market.
Gas prices rising fast, a direct result of the refinery closures following Hurricane Harvey. According to Trilby Lundberg, the average price of regular gasoline was up 30 cents to $2.69, the biggest 2-week price hike since 2011. The most expensive gas can be found in San Francisco at an average price of $3.21 a gallon. The cheapest, $2.31 a gallon, can be found in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Shares of the struggling drug maker Teva soar, and that's where we begin tonight's market focus. After months of speculation, the world's biggest seller of generic drugs named a new CEO. He will be tasked with reviving sales and reducing the company's debt. Teva also recently shuffled its board and shed assets, and investors like the move. The stock up 19% on the session to $18.50. Bristol Myers Squibb reported positive results for an experimental cancer drug, showing an already widely used medication can be used sooner in treatment. The drug is part of a new class of treatments known as immunotherapy. Shares of Bristol Myers Squibb rose slightly to $62.72. And Health Insurance Innovations is expected to face fraud penalties in excess of $100 million. The company develops and administers health insurance plans, including short-term medical, complaints alleged that the company did not cover what its plans claimed it did. The company is facing fraud investigations in 42 states and has lost accreditation in its home state of Florida. Health Insurance Innovations appealing the decision, but the stock fell nearly 22% to $23.35.
Tahoe Resources received a favorable court ruling. The mining company's license for a silver mine in Guatemala was reinstated by the country's Supreme Court. However, there is an ongoing roadblock preventing Tahoe from immediately restarting its operations there. Tahoe Resources stock was up 33% to $6.27. The chicken processor Pilgrim's Pride struck a deal to buy a poultry supplier for $1 billion. The deal is with JBS, the world's largest meat packer, for their British subsidiary Moy Park. Despite the news, the stock fell 3% to $28.17. And Citigroup said its third quarter markets revenue will be lower by about 15% compared to last year. The news was announced today at an investor conference. Citigroup's revenue was boosted last year by the U.S. elections and the Brexit vote in the U.K. Despite the forecast, though, the stock was up 2% to $67.71.
Apple will get plenty of investor attention tomorrow. That's because the king of Cupertino is likely to unveil some fresh products and do it at its brand new billion-dollar headquarters there. Now, the headliner product is rumored to be a new suite of iPhones with one device possibly selling for close to $1,000. Daniel Flack, Senior Technology Analyst at Neuberger Berman, is here now to discuss. Dan, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Great to see you both.
How much smarter can smartphones get? And what are you expecting to see from Apple tomorrow?
I think, Tyler, what's important is that the phones are taking on more and more of the capabilities from other areas. So, for example, payments with Apple Pay. And what this speaks to is that the ecosystem for Apple is moving into newer areas. So, for example, there's augmented reality kit, and that has the potential to unleash a whole new wave of a new experience in the computing arena.
Apple's facing a lot of competition, though, from the likes of Samsung, even though Samsung had its issues with some of its phones and its tablets and the like. Can they out-innovate those other companies?
I think what's important with Apple is that they've been able to integrate hardware, software, and services, and that is what helps to build this differentiated user experience. And so what users have been able to do, whether they have a watch or an iPad or a phone, is move seamlessly between the devices. And that's very powerful, and I think it's difficult for others to replicate.
Let's get to the question of the stock, which either people own individually or they own it in their 401ks and mutual funds or an index fund. The history says that the stock runs up rather dramatically before rumored big product announcements. That's what the stock has done over the past year and over the past couple of months. And then it starts to level off a little bit. There's also the argument that says, well, but this stock is undervalued. Where are you on where this stock may go next?
We think that with a 12 to 18-month horizon, the shares remain attractive. And part of that is because the company has been able to build on what they've done by attracting developers. So we touched on augmented reality. That is a new area, for example.
What is augmented reality? Because for me, reality's fine just the way it is. It doesn't need to be augmented.
Well, if you think about the physical world and the digital world, and so if you were to have a device, if you were shopping for a new sofa and it would be, show an image of the sofa here, that could help. If you were repairing jet engines and you had a device that was able to show you a model of how things might need to look, that could help. So there are all sorts of use cases, many we can cite, but many more that we can't. And that is what's going to be interesting.
I'd like to augment my reality and lose 20 pounds so I could see that, right? See how it look. So basically, you like the stock. 12 to 18 months.
I like the stock, and I think while the shares are likely to remain volatile, for those with a longer-term horizon, it remains attractive.
Daniel Flax with Neuberger Berman, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, Wall Street remembers and gives back. It was a day of remembrance as the nation marked the 16th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. In Washington, President Trump and the First Lady observed a moment of silence. In New York, the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ observed a 1-minute moment of silence to honor the victims of that day.
Cantor Fitzgerald lost more than 650 employees on September 11th, and since then, the firm has used the anniversary of the attacks to raise money for charity. So far, the company has distributed hundreds of millions of dollars. Michael Santoli spent the day on Cantor's New York City trading floor.
$250 million, done. Done.
It's Charity Day at Cantor Fitzgerald. The Wall Street firm is donating all trading revenues to charities that support communities in need with the help of celebrity entertainers and athletes. Today, President Bill Clinton, actor Robert De Niro, and football great Joe Theismann handled trades that added to the $137 million in funds raised by Cantor's Charity Day event since 2002. Actor Steve Buscemi, a former firefighter himself, set the tone of remembrance.
It's all about supporting each other because that feeling never goes away. I mean, you know, they say time heals, and in some ways it does, but in other ways, that's just, it's 16 years that you haven't been with your loved one.
This year, as the country commemorates the catastrophe of 9/11, the toll of present-day disasters was also on the minds of all involved. Cantor is sending help for residents of Texas and Florida suffering after the natural disasters of Hurricanes Harvey and Irma.
On top of taking care of 100 charities, we're going to fly down 250 volunteers, and we're going to adopt, hopefully, between 5,000 and 10,000 families, depending on how much money we can raise. The partners and I have committed $5 million. We hope to raise another $5 million. We're going to give each family with small children, elementary schools, $1,000 each.
The celebrity traders surprised clients by handling huge orders for bonds, with several getting into the competitive spirit on the trading floor. The celebrity guests were also trading to support a charitable cause of their own.
You know, this is a day that we have and hold in remembrance, but I love that Cantor Fitzgerald is doing such a wonderful thing, is making this a day of positivity and giving back and putting something more beautiful into the world so we can remember this day with something a little bit extra.
I love to be in the city for 9/11 because we all went through it together, and to be able to remember it, but also feel like we're still here, we're strong, we're going to do something in the memory of the people that we lost that day. I think that's incredibly important.
Also worth noting, Cantor's own traders gave up a day's pay today, all as part of the firm's commitment to raise as much money as possible for communities in need. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Mike Santoli, New York.
Wonderful commitment that they've made and done it every year.
Absolutely, every single year. That does it for Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Sue Herrera. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Tyler Mathis, and thanks for me as well. Have a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow night.